Welcome back to Brighton with Free and Equal, and today again speaking to Nigel Furness, the 60-year veteran in Brighton and Hove, a man who's seen many comings and goings of different groups in the council here, and indeed in Downing Street, where he worked not with Downing Street itself, but with Smith Square, with the CPC and the Conservative Party. However, today we're going to be talking about something linked to the Conservative Party, which is Priti Patel, potential leader of the party, who Nigel met last week briefly and had an interesting chat with her. So we'll be talking about that experience with Priti, in particular about direct democracy and the uses of it locally and nationally. So, over to you, Nigel.
So Nigel, with regards to Priti Patel, what was that event and what happened there?
Well, good morning, Neil, and thank you, and good morning, everybody. Exactly a week ago today, I had the great honour of meeting very briefly, a couple of times at a meeting in New Haven, Priti Patel, and I did ask Priti Patel, I said, I gather you're a fan of direct democracy. A radiant smile spread across her face and her eyes lit up when she said, I'm a huge fan of direct democracy. I then asked Priti if she was going to allow us to make an honest woman of her, to which she replied something to the effect of, I can't imagine what you mean. I said, well, are you or aren't you going to put us out of our misery and declare you're standing for the leadership? All will be revealed, she smiled. And at the end of about a 20-minute speech, a very good speech, very rousing speech, I have to say, in which she seemed to espouse virtually every one of the principles of direct democracy, she then said, yes, I am letting my name go into the contest. So I was delighted. Look in your room.
That's right. Just keep talking to the camera till we finish, yeah?
Sorry about that. And yes, on going out, on her leaving, I present her with a copy which I always carry about me of the direct, concise, one-page direct democracy. The proposals we have, and. So now I'm waiting to hear, but I have actually sent her an email last night and saying what a pleasure it was to meet her and hoping that she's had time in her busy schedule to read the leaflet. So we await a response.
Okay, so meeting Priti obviously was interesting, but what about the atmosphere at the meeting as well? Because it was a Conservative Party meeting and fairly informal, a dinner, I believe. So
it wasn't a dinner.
It wasn't. It was just
a buffet, a generous buffet, but there was a bar and what have you.
There was food. Yeah. Right. So yeah, let's go with that then. So you went along to this meeting with Priti, but at it there were obviously people sitting around and Conservative Party members, largely, obviously. And what was the atmosphere like? How did you feel about after this disaster in the election? What was the mood of the room?
The mood of the room, frankly, what few people there were there, and I'm not trying to be insulting here because it was, Conservative friends of whom I do still have. Some of them are real Conservatives. I don't wish to be insulted, but the mood was more akin to a funeral parlour. I'm not trying to be unkind, I'm really not.
Yeah.
But I mean, I recognise hardly anybody there. And it was a shock because, if you had an almost immediate past Home Secretary, a position like that come into town, people would be desperate to get their hands on a ticket, almost ticket touts. And I'm serious. I mean, how have the mighty fallen?
And so the numbers were down largely as well.
Dreadfully. Absolutely abysmal in that respect. I mean, it's a big, huge, it's a lovely an indoor bowls club. And it's a really big, huge place, beautifully air conditioned, lovely buffet, very reasonably priced and very good, proper, relays, not from a pump, but in bottles and what have you. Frankly, I mean, if Priti hadn't have been there, I dread to think what it would have been like. She really did light up the room. Now, I have to say, I always speak as I find. I've never met Priti before. I've always been impressed with her as the Home Secretary. But when she was Home Secretary, well, she looked the part. She looked quite formidable. But it's much the same as Margaret Thatcher. Because, there you saw the Iron Lady living up to the press reputation. But when you see a person out of that context, I mean, her smile is absolutely radiant and winning, and those eyes are deeply intelligent and, in my opinion, deeply sincere. I could do business with that lady.
Right, and she worked the room and spoke to people, and she came over well with that?
Yes, she was led round very, very briefly to each one of the tables, and on the way out it was just a question of waving, but I rather ambushed her and gave her the direct democracy leaflet, and she said, "I have enjoyed talking to you."
Right.
So that's as much as I can tell you.
Now, when you think about it, with direct democracy, the issue for parties, obviously, is that the power does not dissolve or does not revolve around the party so much.
Yes.
When you look at how the Swiss work, the people are sovereign. So when you think of someone like the Conservatives or Labour, the major groups that are used to holding power, even the Liberal Democrats, I would think, how do you think they're going to see this rise in the influence of the direct democracy thinkers? When you look at Nigel Farage talking his first speech, he's talking about a referendum on the ECHR.
Oh, yeah.
So you see others talking about it now. I think you just mentioned Tom Tugendhat was talking about looking at it. But that's obviously been prompted, presumably, by Nigel, talking about a referendum. But he's not offering that. But Priti Patel is obviously more, is happier with having direct democracy discussed, as you found. So do you see this change in the atmosphere going beyond just someone like Priti Patel, who's more in line with it? How do you think the parties are going to cope with people becoming more demanding about direct democracy?
Well, to me, this will sort the wheat from the chaff, and by that I mean Priti Patel is most definitely an honest lady. I know a thing or two about who's honest and who is dishonest from my many years involved at much higher levels. There is a sincere woman. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. But it's the greasy pole climbers, those who are queuing up to get themselves put on the central selection list, parachuted into the first available by-election, into somewhere that might as well be Timbuktu because they know damn all about it. These are the ones that are not going to like it. And of course, plenty still remain among the rump of the Tories.
Because you were offered the opportunity to take a parachute-in job, weren't you? You were offered that as an MP, but you declined.
Yes.
Because you believe in the localism and the requirement that you should know that, place you're going to be representing people from. So it's obvious that a lot of these people are that ambitious. They'll take anything rather than having any standards, we might say. So when you see that and you think that there's a number left, obviously, in Conservatives, then someone like Priti Patel, what's the issue for her? How does she overcome this kind of antipathy towards the idea, do you think?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how she overcomes that, by doing exactly what she did at the Lewis District Conservative Association meeting, and that was by attacking central office, which she did. She put both boots in. Is it any surprise, she said, should it be any surprise to us that we lost the election, and by the magnitude we did? don't quote me please, but I believe she said that she was only surprised the magnitude wasn't greater, because she said that she got in on a narrow majority. I don't know how narrow that is. But Priti said it serves the party, note the party, it serves the party right. It serves head office right, because they turned their backs on their core support. They ignored and refused to listen to the members and didn't even give them a vote on the last change of Prime Minister. What more would we expect? Rather than spending volunteers' hard-earned funds on endless begging emails, not content with that, they send out letters begging for money. They could save themselves all that postage by just listening to membership. Power, said Priti, comes from the bottom up. Well, if that's not direct democracy, you tell me what is, Neil.
Yeah, she's expressed that support very clearly to you.
Very clear. Well, that's to everybody, not just to me.
Right.
That was in her speech for culminating in saying, yes, I'm going to let my hat drop into the ring.
Right. So, but prior to that, she's spoken to you personally around the table with others.
Only briefly, very briefly.
But she'd mentioned, that she thought a huge supporter. Those were her words.
Yes, and her face absolutely lit up. Oh, yes, she beamed. I'm a huge supporter of direct democracy.
And we know, that she's been a supporter since at least 2007, because obviously there were documents that the Conservative Party produced then.
Yeah.
Michael Gove signed up to it, Kwasi Kwarteng, James Hunt. So
even David Cameron.
Even David Cameron did that video that we've seen now. So, in terms of within the party then, you look at what's happened recently. You were talking about the statements she was making about they were not listening, but they were listening to somebody, weren't they? Now, as you know, it goes beyond our own country now. We are looking at, this vassal state that we are, in terms of most of our industries, most of our companies, the major ones in particular, are very international, largely American-based. So the Tory party is becoming very much, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but this is my opinion, I'd like your thoughts on this. That's an experience, in the party at the senior level, in the planning side. Then what do you think of this, where the Americans, it's not just NATO we're talking about here, it goes much deeper than this at the political level now, and I believe there's even more of this going on, more interference in us beyond NATO, but into our own home affairs. It was there before, undoubtedly, but I think now it's winding up further. So we have this battle between representatives who they can control and the people taking over in a similar fashion to Switzerland with a hybrid semi-direct democracy with the people having the final say. This is our vision, as a movement. It's not party driven, but it's nice to see someone like Priti Patel talking in this fashion. So what are your thoughts on that level of influence? Have you seen that growing? Do you think that's what's behind a lot of this globalism that we're seeing at national levels?
I have absolutely no doubt of it, because in my days in central office and in the policy think tank, we were very much focused on getting our country back, and yes, I think it's safe to say, making Britain great again. And
when was this again? Sorry, years?
Oh, this was in the 80s, under the premiership of Margaret Thatcher. Who else? Certainly not John Major. Or the predecessor,
the grey man.
Ted Heath. Yes.
Would you get that call, please? We'll leave that in. Right. That must have been the Prime Minister calling. Oh, sorry about that, mate. Okay.
Somehow I doubt it.
Right, so your thoughts and you're saying making Britain great again in the 80s. So in terms of the growing over the last few decades, what have you seen in that pattern, even at local level in Brighton, What were your thoughts on that?
Well, what I've seen is the ever-growing centralism, and the ever-growing centralism politically comes from the ever-growing corporatism of the huge multinational globalist corporations who for quite some, easily 2 decades now, I believe, it's been said that most of these huge conglomerates actually wield far more power than the leaders of countries. And I'm not just talking European countries, I'm talking about countries all around, and have way too much influence in the USA. The home of free trade, there's a joke, free trade?
Right, yeah.
Free trade? Not unless you join our club, the Rotten Club, just across the channel there.
Yeah. And what about here in Brighton, where you've seen some changes in the system, I believe, just recently. So, and that swings towards central, or speaks to centralism again, centralisation. Centralisation is really, in the end, it's about globalisation. They're all tied together. Globalisation, monopolisation. So, what about the monopolisation of power here? What was the system before Labour came in this time around? And what's happening now?
Okay, well, that's an easy one. We had the cabinet system. We were one of very few councils to still retain I beg your pardon, the cabinet system. Wash my mouth out with soap. The committee system.
Right.
Now, we had lost the committee system some years before, and we had regained it. And believe it or not, it was the Greens who had a large hand in bringing back, always credit where it's due, in bringing back the committee system. And in actual fact, there was a movement I was heavily involved in, that was in, ironically, the year 2000, and all the nonsense about the Millennium City. And this is where all this began. Her Majesty, the late Her Majesty, in her infinite wisdom, granted city status to a collection of towns, which, yes, were a conurbation together, and I agreed in the teeth of a lot of fierce opposition. I was one of the leading lights in advocating that the conurbation should be put together so that we could have strategic planning, because anybody knows, Neil, only too well, to get from A to B today, to think. In the year 2000, they were talking about rapid transit. Really? Well, it seems the buses are going backwards. Cars can't go forwards, never mind backwards. Now, all this they began to get ideas above their station, and they wanted a directly elected mayor. Anybody remember the squatter lord, Steve Bassam, who of course became the leader of Brighton and Hove Council, and then that was back in 1997, and straight away they began to lay plans for a directly elected mayor. Now, a lot of us got together, and it was a marvellous example of cross-party working, just like Brexit. All members of all parties were involved: Labour, Tory, Green, Lib Dem, and members of no parties, just concerned citizens. We all worked together, and we set up an organisation called, it was the late Keith Taylor who became the second Green leader of the council some years ago. He was one of the original Greens that got onto the council.
So this was something like an ad hoc direct democracy, really, getting together, pressure from across the board.
Yes, thank you, because that is exactly what it was. And just like with direct democracy, it didn't matter what party you belonged to. It was nobody's business what your political views were, and it was certainly not your right, anybody's right, to hurl abuse at other people simply because they have a different view. The key in selling direct democracy that I found, and I do now have Labour councillors, 1.5, as a work in progress, Green councillors who are advocating. And how have I done that? By saying, how could you possibly disagree with giving the people their choice? And presumably you do believe in democracy. I've yet to have one person react in any other way than, horror, what are you suggesting? Of course I agree with democracy, then prove it. Simple.
So in those terms, the argument when it's put to people is often surprised. They go, well, I never heard of it working like this in modern times. You might have heard of it in ancient, But when the reaction then is always positive, that's
Yes.
what you're finding from
Yes.
left to right, green
Yes.
to red, whatever.
There's only one actually I've heard, and he's alive at the moment, so I'm not going to name names. A former Labour councillor who said to me on the night of the count, the recent general election, and I said, well, here you are, let me give you a leaflet on the direct democracy. And I said, oh, I've heard about this, said he. And he said, this is, I believe, employed in Switzerland. I said, yes, you're absolutely right. Well, unfortunately, it's just going to end up in a dog's dinner where we'll never be able to get anything done. I said, aren't you getting mixed up with proportional representation? No, I am not. He was quite adamant about it. He used to have quite a high-ranking position in the former Labour administration, and a lovely guy. I get on very well with him. We agree on virtually everything, but I'm afraid he's one of the Labour, what I call ivory towers people. Well, we've studied this for all these years. Yes, yes, yes. That's why I'm not naming names. I have no wish to fall out. But if he gets to watch this, he'll know exactly who I'm referring to.
For our viewers, of course, this is not an uncommon view among certain people who've got power or have an interest in power. Because if you do look at the Swiss system, you find, of course, that it does work exceedingly well, and that's why the people there, 75% of them, in fact, are supporters of their government. Our government support was down to about 42 before COVID. So what it is now, I would hate to think. So systemically, the Swiss are about the most happy in the world with their system, and quite rightly. And their debt levels are about 40% of GDP, whilst ours are the 100% mark now.
Yeah.
So in terms of these assertions, they are just assertions. They're not empirical science. They're not facts. The facts are that the Swiss system has been honed since 1848, as you know, and it works extremely well. Hence why we're pushing it. I'm a believer in experience and practicality, like you. And like you've worked your way from the Communist Party through to the Conservative Party. A ruthless communist, almost revolutionary.
Very revolutionary.
Exactly. Into Smith Square in the planning department with the Conservative Party during the height of the Conservative era, you might say, with Mrs. Thatcher.
Oh, the height of it.
But now you're a convinced direct democracy advocate after 60 years of experience in local government here. And as you say, now going out to talk to other parties, Green, Labour, whoever, to say, why don't we use these tools that have been trialled and are working in Switzerland. So in terms of local, how do you see it around the country? How could we get this idea, do you think, from the north to the southwest, all the way across the country? How would we get this idea spread of direct democracy at the local level? What are your thoughts on that?
Pardon me. That's easy too, because what we've been doing here, what I've been doing for many, many years, groping in the dark before discovering, it's thanks to you I discovered direct democracy and the Swiss system. I had no idea. And most people simply do have no idea because they've never heard of Switzerland. When I say, why? Perhaps because they're neutral, perhaps they haven't been involved in any wars since 1848, perhaps because they had the common sense, because the people voted no, no, no against the politicians on every single occasion. We do not wish to be members of the European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Now, at a local level, stop and think. What I just described about the Allies for Democracy. Our campaign slogan...
Allies for Democracy. That's a great name.
Well, that was the late Keith Taylor who came up with that name. Now, I will always give credit where it's due. He and I used to get on very well, but unfortunately in my UKIP days, then I was the devil reincarnate, and it was, frankly, childishly ridiculous that somebody that I had worked with before, had always shown great respect to, and vice versa. All of a sudden I'm persona non grata. That's when I first started learning about deplatforming and what have you, and they would do everything they could to stop me getting on public platforms. They seldom succeeded, I might add.
It was like an early version of Trump derangement syndrome, wasn't it?
Oh, that's exactly
just,
it.
You know, you're a fascist if you
Oh
support
gosh, yes.
UKIP.
Oh, I'm still a fascist, you know. I'm
it's
still a
incredible, really,
Nazi.
isn't it?
I've probably got any number of heads. Goodness only knows what they're saying about me, but guess what? I don't give a damn. And they will not encourage me in any way to change my views by any means other than sitting down, like Winston Churchill said, jaw is better than war.
And could you have seen UKIP in power, just for instance, trying to enforce jabs on children?
Good God, no.
Exactly. And yet, we've got these parties happily doing so. Now, this is where we're talking about, you know, as we spoke earlier, about how much of this to do is with foreign interference. How much is this to do with our liberties as an ancient nation with, you know, liberties that we've earned and been hard earned, as you know, under the common law and the precedents that those all set for us to maintain these liberties. And we've eventually got to the law courts and won, you know. But prior to that, the governments were more than happy to override our liberties, our ancient liberties, without taking account of what, you know, we would naturally feel. And yet here we are, you know, you and I both form a UKIP, looking at the way we were treated and continue to be. You still mention UKIP now, there's still the hairs on the back of their necks.
I still get people screaming in the street, total strangers, UKIP, Mr. UKIP. And I always say, well, how lovely to meet you. I don't recall we've had a conversation before. Yes, I'm happy to be Mr. UKIP. Thank you for the compliment. I don't like it.
You should have got a hat with it on your baseball cap, Mr. UKIP.
No, I'm not that awful Steve Bray. I did manage to shout him down though, in the days of Theresa May. Yes, he left with his tail between his legs.
Who was this again?
Steve Bray. Steve Bray, the person, stop Brexit. I wonder how few, if any, people know that he is actually paid by the Labour Party.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was the case. Now, I'll rephrase that because that may not be the case now.
Right.
He was paid, I believe it was £250 or £350 a week, and he had a grace and favour flat in Westminster.
Incredible.
And prior to that, I believe, but I'm not totally sure, that he was a dole addict.
A dole?
Addict. And therefore they found a person who had to have a particularly loud and irritating voice. I may well do so myself, for all I know. I can't hear it. But
you're not on the dole, and you're not being paid by the
pensioner
or whoever.
as you can see.
Right. Good. So in terms of getting this message around at a local level, and how do you think activists, you know, who are supporting the idea of real democracy, which is the semi-direct one that we're talking about, really, because direct democracy has its issues, it does, but so does representative.
Well, everything has its issues.
It does, but it just seems to be, doesn't it, this combination of the direct system, where the people have the final say, and the representatives getting out there and doing the donkey work, it does work well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because it reflects, you know, the control that's required of a nation with a disparate people with lots of different views, but it allows the people eventually, when they've considered things deeply, you know, they get all that information, you know, as they do in Switzerland. We'd do the same here, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So at local level, what are your thoughts about how would you say to an activist like, this is what I'd be thinking of doing in your area, and how would that work?
Well, we've got a prime example, which is just out of camera shot over the road there, the King Alfred swimming pool, what they call it, the leisure complex, sporting leisure complex, all manner of things in there, perfectly solid building. They've now decided, the cabinet system of the council have now decided that they are going to demolish the building, flog off the land, all the land that it stands on, every bit of it, for luxury housing. No mention, I might add, by a Labour cabinet with a massive majority of any kind of affordable or social housing, and build a 5-storey replacement on the footprint of the car park, and you know the size of that, next to it. Now, whereas a number of us are all pulling together. Quite a disparate collection of individuals, and we battled and battled to save that King Alfred, and we're battling on, because what we're putting our heads together about now, and I might add there are different political persuasions in this group of people, is to call for a local referendum on it. Now this city, well, as what is now a city, the city itself, or the Brighton and Hove Council, has had one referendum already, and that was on the directly elected mayor, which we won by an absolute landslide.
How long ago was that?
That was in the year 2000.
2000, and there's not been one since.
No.
No real local feedback.
No.
They have you can put petitions in, can't you? You can try and petition.
Yes, you can.
But this is not the same as calling out directly for a referendum that the people get the chance to give their feedback in across, the city. So the 25 years ago, nearly, since the last one, and this is a council facility, isn't it?
Oh, it's a council-owned facility.
And you've had the objections, and the problem is, of course, they lost the last referendum. So what's their eagerness for another one?
It would appear there is no eagerness, but are we daunted by that? Well, of course we're not. We will battle on, as we always do. There have always been, in what we now call a city, there have always been protesters. Seldom did they have a name. I used to call the various things I was involved in the group with no name. The former Labour leader just in the early noughties, just after Lord Bassam went, one Ken Bodfish used to sneer up at us in the public gallery in Hove Town Hall. Yes, well, who would disagree with us? Only like so, with a disparaging sweep of his arm and a flick back of his ridiculously overlong hair, the usual suspects up there.
Yeah, i.e. the people.
Yeah, i.e. the people.
Yeah.
The usual suspects.
Right.
And I have to say, it's a slight diversion, but I think you'll enjoy it. There was an occasion whereby, I had actually encouraged and developed 7 Labour councillors who were full-time rebels. Add to that another 4 who were part-time. The part-time would abstain on some occasions. The full-time ones would vote against, and yes, with the Tory and Green opposition. There were no Lib Dems, none of those. And, of course, we caused the Geary Towers. Now, for those who don't know, Frank Geary, the supposedly brilliant architect, I have my own opinions, and it's best I keep them to myself. But suffice to say, what he wanted to create there, demolish our swimming pool, put up 4 immense towers. I believe they would have been about 485 feet tall.
What?
Yes, didn't you know about that?
No, I don't.
Well, that's the early part of this century.
Right.
And he wanted to put these towers up and call them the 4 Maidens of Hove. Well, so said this ridiculous American woman who came up to the planning committee and said, back home in LA, I don't know, I mustn't try and do an American accent, I can't do them. But back home in LA, she said, Frank has this beautiful Edwardian picture of 4 ladies walking along the prom on a windy day, and their left hands are clutching their rather over-large hats, and their right hands are clutching their billowing skirts, and that's what gave him the genius idea for these towers, because I kid you not, they look like, what's that twisted spaghetti? What do you call that? Tagliatelle or something. This way and that. All you had to do, which I did, and you talk about the king has got no clothes on, everybody was looking at the exhibition where they had like the scale model in the town hall.
It was a vanity project for Mr. Geary.
But guess what? Nobody looked on from above. They're all stooping down and peering this way. Me being the height I am, 6'4", I looked down from on top, and they were just 4 blocks of flats shaped like crosses, and this lattice work a flimsy-looking aluminium that's twisted and bent every
visual,
which way.
Pure visual, not substance.
Yes,
There we
absolutely. And well, I shouted down to the public gallery. Well, they put me more in mind chair of the 4 lagerlouts of Hove, staggering home on a windy night after a good skinful. The planning committee had to be abandoned, and guess what? When it reconvened, they never did get it through, because I also shouted, the longer we can delay, the recession cometh, to which, of course, Bodfish shouted up, you're enough to depress a rutty saint. And it all got on the news. The headlines of the BBC News and the local magazine programme followed, and the headlines said, proceedings at a meeting of Brighton Hove City Council degenerated into a farce. And what you had was Bodfish singing a very good impersonation of Adolf Hitler, ranting and screaming at those in the gallery. You lot up there, you like to think you're...
You lot.
Oh yes, you lot up there, you like to think you're... He looked like a backstreet bully. In reality, probably couldn't punch through a paper bag, that's another story. You lot up there, you like to think you're running this council. Guess what? I've got news for you. You're not.
Exactly.
I am. Oh no, you're not. Oh yes, I am. Oh, really?
But see, that's interesting as well.
Seriously, this is true.
Yeah, I can believe it. There's an article by, this Daniel Hannan, who was the MEP.
Oh, I know Dan Hannan.
So Dan,
I know Dan.
So he was, an MEP with the Conservatives.
Yeah.
But he made the point that he used to go skiing with the Swiss politicians sometimes.
Oh, did he?
Yes, indeed. And he said, when he spoke to them, they were very jealous because they would like to have been in the EU. Because you see, it's not about the country, it's about their own personal lives, their own personal careers. So even the political class in Switzerland, not a fan of direct democracy.
Oh, I bet.
They are subordinated, you know, and they're not working full time like these ones in Britain where they get paid, you know. And I was talking to someone, I think it's Barnsley Council. All the councillors are on £32,000, so I was told. This only came out not long back. 32 grand. They've had Barnsley Labour for donkey's years. So you see how these people, if you love all the political talk and posturing, how attractive it, even in Switzerland with the Swiss. This is why direct democracy is so important, because it takes this capability of those people to feather their nests, to line their pockets. And this is real. This is not, I'm not talking about corruption here in the sense of, they're taking money backhanders. But suddenly they need those extra committee meetings, and that means they have to become more full-time.
Got it.
And before you know it, they're getting paid not just expenses, a few grand a year. It becomes a stipend. It becomes a living. And then they're in. Then you're done. See, and this is why, and why we need it now more than we ever have. We've never had real democracy, as you know, in this country, at a local level. But you've been doing this for 60 years. 60 years. So what have you seen in terms of, quite a few years back, the representatives, you might say, were more representative than they are now.
Oh, good God, yes.
So what's this decline you've seen? You've watched half a century, more than half a century of decline, I would suggest. Maybe at first it wasn't so good, then it was better, or what are your thoughts about when you look back now from 60 years of experience at a local level? What has the decline been? How is that? Has it waxed and waned, or has it just been a continual decline?
It's been, if I had to do a graph, largely a decline, but it waxed when the wonderful Mary Mears, whom we lost just over a week ago, the only ever Conservative leader of the city council, was 3 years lead with this city. It was definitely waxing up, but unfortunately the Greens won their first administration in 2011, and then it just, frankly, nosedived. But the fact is, you raise an interesting point, because when I go back to the mid-60s, the councillors were invariably older,
Right.
And there was absolutely nothing wrong with that, because they were retired people. They were people who'd been playing hugely important roles in the community. Everybody has an important role. When I say hugely important, particularly skilled teachers, local business people, local traders, taxi drivers. There used to be taxi drivers who had such an intimate knowledge of the city, of its heritage.
As we would know.
As we would know, both former taxi drivers, me 3 times. But, full of people, and they had, and this is no disrespect to younger generations, you've got to always have a balance. You must have.
Absolutely.
Maybe it was to balance towards older people. Then came this idea, oh, well, councillors really should get a small wage, whereas before they took their expenses, they were entitled to take anything they'd actually spent on, but they didn't get any wages. Meetings used to go on through the night, meetings at Brighton Council. Not so in Hove, because it was just true blue Tory, but Labour had been creeping up and up and up and up over the decades.
So there was no money for appearing at all?
Oh, no.
Just your expenses for your taxi getting there maybe, or whatever?
Yeah. Well, that was it. And they used to sign an expenses book. And there were certain people, there were some very bad elements, particularly in Hove Council, I hate to say, who would come in, they would sign the book, and this applied to committee meetings as well as to full council meetings, and go straight back out again. They could claim their expenses. But the expenses were just that. They weren't a wage. The wage came in, I believe it started at 8,000 a few years ago. It's now gone up to about 13,000, plus, of course, perks. One of the few things that people don't realise is that the councillors can just put a little thing in their car and they can virtually, not totally, but virtually park wherever they like. If it's council car parks, they get free things. They get their bus pass. You know, well, I have a bus pass. I would at 74.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are all sorts of different perks. And as soon as ever, this is key, as soon as ever those wages came in, yes, they weren't very much. But that's when you saw a lot more greasy pole climbers, a lot of younger people, and then always agitating to put them up a little bit more and put them up a little bit more. Then, of course, the bungling bureaucracy really got a stranglehold, and I mean a stranglehold on the city, because that's jobs for the boys and money. Now, council officers, we have far too many council officers. Now, they're the ones who get the really huge money. Well, the ones
they're the
at the
well-paid
top.
ones, yeah.
Yeah, but you see, this is the point. When you get people who start looking upon politics as a career, in days of old, it was the thing to do that people who became, here's another category, magistrates, JPs, councillors, that was always to put something back into the community. They'd been local business people, they'd had a well-paid job as a head teacher or whatever, and they wanted to give something back. That was a sense of duty, and they took civic pride. You don't take a look outside, right outside here, anywhere you want to go. Welcome to Tip City. I've now updated that to Cesspit City, and the name seems to be rapidly catching on, because that's exactly what we are. There's no one here taking any pride, and the biggest reason for that, quite apart from everything I've mentioned, is that this place tends to import people. And when I say people, I mean the political parties. We had the car.
It's a training ground, really.
It's an experimental laboratory. First for the Greens, well, to a lesser degree, first for Labour, but much lesser degree. Then by the Greens, then by Momentum, and now it's Starmer's laboratory. We've got his speechwriter, Well, he's got a lot to answer for, hasn't he? The speechwriter is now the MP, parachuted into Kent Town.
Oh, parachuted in.
Parachuted in.
Is that the one I saw being interviewed who knew nothing about the city?
That's the one. Yes, and chased by a mob, pursued by a mob of people. That was the audience at a public meeting held in St George's Chapel.
And he seemed, arrogant.
Very arrogant.
Arrogant.
Very
a lot of
arrogant.
these people, I've got a time in some university somewhere, and they think this qualifies them for everything in life.
Yeah.
And this is not unusual, of course, nowadays. But of course, 50% of the young people today go to university. There's nothing special about a degree.
Nothing whatever.
Nothing at all. And as you say, in the past, it was definitely, yes, you might have thought of old fuddy-duddies, but they'd done something. They'd been running a shopping centre that they'd set up themselves and made it a success.
Oh, yeah.
Or they'd been good teachers who'd run a school. So, the different branches were coming in to help with the community and put, as you said, put something back. Now it's more about taking something out than putting something back.
Well
That's
said.
what you wonder.
That's
what you wonder. I mean, we're not exactly, Springboks, are we?
No.
We're not spring chickens.
No, we're not.
We're not. But, we do bring to, the conversation, hopefully, some experience. And unfortunately, we're not in it for the money. Well, have you ever been paid, since you were involved in the past, with the Conservative Party maybe or something, some expenses, etc.? Same with me. We do this gratis, hopefully, to ensure that there is proper democracy again, because I don't think the reliance on that way of thinking is gone, this is why direct democracy will bring that back, I believe, because, as those politicians in Switzerland have found, it's not a money earner, it's not a big earner, but that keeps them honest. Then you get the people who want to do something decent.
So why would they want to go into it?
Exactly.
Unless they were genuine people.
Correct, exactly. And you think of the group that you're with, how many of them are getting paid? But they're genuine, the day is long, aren't they?
Well, look at our group here at the moment that's battling to preserve the King Alfred, are battling to get a referendum. None of us are paid. Okay, I'm retired, so I can devote as much time as I'm physically up to, but all the rest of them are working full time. I mean, absolutely take my hat off to a lot of them.
Fantastic, isn't it?
They never stop. And why? And they're a lot younger than me, I might add.
Yeah.
Because, and that gives me such hope, I think, well, all the work I've done all these years is not in vain. I feel it. I've died and gone to heaven. All these younger and younger people than me wanted to get involved at last.
And they were involved in many things before, but how was the thoughts of direct democracy and that system helped, do you think, in terms of pulling together different groups of people who are, motivated, but are looking at this thing or that thing? Do they see direct democracy as a way of capturing all of these issues and bringing a focus on them that means that they're enthused by the direct democracy idea and what it can do for their particular interests?
Well, every single one of them, every single one of the ones in our loosely knit group are believers in direct democracy. Why do you think we're calling or formulating a means to call for a local referendum? We were going to call for 2, but I think now we might put 2 into 1, because 1 we wanted. And by the way, this is where I was approached by a Labour councillor, a sitting Labour councillor, on behalf of the convener of the Green group of councillors, because, well, you people are good, and I quote, you people are good at referendums. We need the group with no name, or the Friends of Brighton and Hove, if you'd rather call us that, because of the cabinet system. The cabinet system that was just imposed like that at the stroke of a pen, and I might add, by a council leader who claims to be a Brightonian. Very strange. In my 74 years, I never come across the name, the face, or the person. Mind you, so did Tom Gray, the Labour parliamentary candidate for Pavilion, claimed to have been resident in Brighton for 10 years. It's very odd because, you know, I meet an enormous number of people. And if I don't know somebody, I'll know someone else who knows them. But when people say, who? Never heard of him.
And what about this?
Parachuted in.
Parachuted in, and
Parachuted
the
in.
cabinet side of it, was that mentioned in the manifesto, or the
No.
ideas that they were putting forward at the time?
Was demolishing the King Alfred swimming pool meant in the manifesto? Was extending the cycle lane right opposite here where the shops are and the parking for the shops. Now they want to extend the cycle lane on the road right the way out to Portslade.
So it wouldn't be unreasonable to say to them, if you're going to have any non-manifesto ideas and policies you wish to impose, why don't we have a referendum on them?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a major
major
project we're talking about here.
That is the main emergency vehicle route for the whole city. They go right along the seafront.
Yes, and then
they can't go anywhere else because the roads have been strangled by artificially engineered gridlock. And this will cost lives. I'm telling you now, this will cost lives. If there's a major fire, if there's a terrorist explode, anything you like to mention, anything that requires an ambulance, anything that requires the police, if somebody's gone berserk with a knife or whatever, how do they get? Imagine that narrowed down to one lane. Yes, one lane. Imagine what happens when you get a break. Yes, one lane. One. Because what they intend to do is a 6-lane dual carriageway here. The inner lane on this side and on the other side is for parking. So you then had two lanes. You will have one lane. Hello? What happens if there's a breakdown? What is that plan the NASA has, and finally plan, what do they call it?
Oh, well, I don't know.
You know, for if something can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Oh, right, okay, I forgot the name,
But this isn't progress, this is
how it does
regress. They're dragging us back into the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages.
You think about it with that Microsoft collapse recently.
That's good.
Where's the redundancy?
Yep.
Where's the safety margin built in? You know, I mean, it can seem like you're over-engineering sometimes, but the reality is, you know, it's in the military. You know, from my past, it's all worst case analysis. What's the worst case? And then we work forward from that. What's the worst case? And we plan around that and all the options on this and options on that. And here, unfortunately, you know, and they're lightweight thinkers. You're talking about lightweight thinkers.
Can I correct you, please? Are they thinkers? Are they thinkers? They're my lightweight.
Well, unfortunately, you know, this is what your city is run by, and then when they put things in manifestos, they don't stick to them, and when they bring something up, it's not even in the manifesto.
You got it.
There we go.
A case for direct democracy and local referenda, if ever there were one.
Nigel, I think we've covered much today.
We have.
So thank you very much indeed for that.
Well, thank you very much.
It was an interesting chat. So I wish you all the best with your campaign there and your team. You're lovely people, decent people who are trying to do the best for the city and the life of the people in the city. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Keep well, Nigel. Thank you.